The Lord is with you.
And also with you.
This is a reading of the Holy Gospel as we find in the tradition of St. Mark.
Glory to you, Lord.
Excuse me, the print on here is a little smaller than I thought. Jesus and his disciples left the district and began to journey throughout Galilee. But Jesus did not want anyone to know about it. He was teaching his disciples in this vein. The promised one is going to be delivered into the hands of those who will put him to death. 3 days later, he will rise. Though they failed to understand these words, they were afraid to question him. They returned to Capernaum, and Jesus, once outside the house, began to ask them, "What were you discussing on your way home?" At this, they all fell silent, for they, on their way, had begun to argue among themselves who was the most important. So Jesus sat them down and called the 12 over and said, "If any one of you wishes to rank first, you must remain the least of all and be of service to all." Then Jesus brought a little child into their midst, and putting his arms around the child, he said to them, "Whoever welcomes a child such as this for my sake welcomes me. And whoever welcomes me welcomes not me, but the one who sent me." And this is the good news of our salvation.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
So we listened to several readings, and very, very interesting, and especially that second reading from the letter of St. James. It talks about jealousy. Probably of all the vices that we might have and all the vices that we can entertain, jealousy is probably one of the most destructive. Because jealousy does not only hurt the person to whom it's addressed, but it hurts the person from whom it comes. Jealousy is one of those things that causes us to begin to eat away at our very selves. On PBS, there's a show called Poldark. I don't know if anybody's familiar with it. And the premise of this mini drama is that a young captain comes back from the United States after having served on the British Army during the Revolutionary War here in the States. And he comes back, and England is beginning to change, and things, the classes are beginning to come together and clash because the upper class doesn't want the lower class, and the lower class doesn't want the upper class, etc., etc. But one of the scenes is an individual by the name of George Woolhagen. And he is so jealous of Ross Poldark that he even begins to turn against his own wife and his own child because he feels or thinks or fantasizes that the child that is born of his wife may or may not be Ross Poldark's. And in the last episode, his wife Elizabeth confronts him with this and says, "Do you not see how jealousy is eating you up? It is taking from you your ability to even love your own son." And that's the danger That's the danger of jealousy. We call jealousy a green-eyed monster. And Shakespeare, in one of his plays, said, "Beware of jealousy, my lord, for it mocks even the meat it eats." It mocks even the food it lives on, which is ourselves. We hear this story about Jesus coming back from the territory of the 10 cities where he was up at Caesarea Philippi in the north of the country. And basically, he was out of Israel. He was in a pagan territory. And he comes back to Capernaum, which he takes as his hometown now. And he begins to wonder what's going on, because the disciples seem to be busy about many things as they're coming home and discussing among themselves, probably kind of like this or like that, so that the master would not hear. And so he asks them the question, "What is it that you were talking about? What's going on?" And then they have to confess that they were talking about what and who would be the most important in the kingdom of God, in the reign that is supposed to be ushered in with this new Messiah. And here again, we understand that even after all this time, the disciples still don't understand that the Messiahship that Jesus is portraying is not one of an earthly kingdom. And yet they still hope to be sitting on thrones governing people throughout Israel and becoming very, very important in the eyes of others. We even have in the gospel story of the mother of James and John coming to Jesus and say, "Promise me that when you come into your kingdom, that my sons will sit one on your right and one on your left." And so a lot of people still didn't understand what was going on. And it is here that Jesus begins to say, that's not what it's all about. That's not what it's all about. It's about service to one another. It's about being servant. And we don't see this until Jesus, at the Last Supper, stands up in the middle of this very ritualized, structured Passover meal, takes off his cloak, puts a towel around his waist, and kneels down and washes the feet of his disciples. Totally unexpected. Totally unexpected. The Master kneeling in front of me to wash my feet. And that's why Peter was moved to say, "Lord, you will never wash my feet." And Jesus said to him, "Peter, if I do not wash your feet, you will have no part in me." And that's where he said, "Then, Lord, not only my feet, but my hands and my head as well." Tonight we are confronted with a very real thing in our lives. And this thing called jealousy, the thing that we harbor within ourselves, can be so destructive. So destructive. And yet we know that we've all been there. We've all been there. Every single one of you in this room, and myself included, has experienced that green-eyed monster of jealousy. Look what she has. See, that's a nice new car you got. Even if it's trying to say something about somebody, there's always going to be that, as they say in Italian, I bot, that little twit, because of the fact I'm jealous. You know, it was a tradition, and I think it still is. I remember my uncle my uncle Pasquale, every time he got a new car, he put a big ribbon hanging from the back, from the rear view mirror. And that is because of the fact that if anybody gave a malocchia because he had a brand new car, that would ward it off. Kind of make it, okay, it hit the red ribbon and bounce out. But he had a red ribbon on that new car every time. And I said, Uncle Pa, what's it? I said, malocchia. You don't want the evil eye. You don't want somebody to feel jealous because then they have power. But these vices, my brothers and sisters, are very real. We don't think about them too much anymore. We used to talk about the 10 deadly sins and the virtues and the this and that. We don't do that anymore. But yet they're still part of our humanity. They're still very much a part of who and what we are. Is that bad? Maybe. But it's human. It's part of who and what we are. It's part of who and what God made us. Not to be jealous with one another, not to envy with one another, not to want other people whatever they have. And that's why Moses had to put in, do not envy the goods. Don't envy your neighbor's goods. And that's jealousy. And so we have to be careful. We have to be careful. And we have to look at that idea of servanthood. Within the churches, Christian churches predominantly, there has been a new movement called servant leadership. And servant leadership is a program which many churches have adopted for their leaders to undergo, which teaches them how to be servant of all and leader in this community. And it's a very interesting concept because it follows the gospel. Jesus was the leader. There was no question about it. But he was also the servant of all. Jesus always portrayed himself as the lowest of the low so that he could be the first of the first. Jesus always gave that example to serve one another, to be the last, so that you could be the first. However you want to put it, tonight we are asked to look at that little green-eyed monster that may be hiding just behind our neighbor's new car. Our sister's new boyfriend, our neighbor's new house, whatever it might be. Or just because I want what I want when I want it and can't have it. Mm-hmm. And as St. James says tonight, we don't have it because we haven't prayed properly. We haven't prayed properly. So, when we feel, as they say in Italian, geloso, we have to understand that that's not who we are about. That's not who we are about. And when that little green-eyed monster starts to make its way to the fore, we have to say, that's not what I am as a Christian. That is not who I am. And I will not allow you to determine how I shall live my life, because I have given my life over to the Lord as a little child, in childlike, not childish, wonder and awe.